I really am very grateful for the relationship that we have in Vero, and super grateful for the opportunity that we have to kind of walk you guys through what we do and fill you in on the Microsoft security story. What we're going to do is we're going to walk through a bit of high level kind of cyber threat landscape. We're going to talk through some challenges. We'll address why Microsoft, how Microsoft and what they're up to helps address that. And then we're going to actually get into a few security related or a security use case tied to some of the content that was covered earlier by Julio, Davey, and Max as well, to try to kind of bring it all together. Without further ado, funny thing too this morning, I'm getting ready to present today, and we're talking about do more with less. And I was reading this article in CBC News today about this giant meatball that was cultivated from the DNA of a woolly mammoth, amongst other animals. Right, so talk about do more with less, right? Not having to kind of breed a multitude of animals to produce a meatball of this size, but being able to cultivate a meatball of this size using DNA is remarkable. I thought that this was kind of the epitome of do more with less. Amazing stuff. I don't know if I'd eat the meatball. It looks tasty, but so interesting things that are happening in our world today. And one of the things that we see in the news every day is the ongoing cyber threats out there. I'm sure folks that are in IT, anybody that's got any stake in information technology and has that kind of bit of stake in cybersecurity is probably, I'm guessing, bombarded by stats. The stats keep changing, and these are one kind of grouping of stats that Microsoft provides. As of today, we're in and around the $4.35 million average cost for data breach. We're talking about ever increasing costs around cybercrime. We're talking about doing more with less, which is going to be a key concept of what we're looking to kind of talk through today. This was interesting too. Microsoft had one of many security events yesterday. And in that event, they kept touching on the fact that for every 2 cybersecurity positions that are filled in the US, there is 1 open position. And we know this very well. I mean, obviously, we actively are constantly recruiting cybersecurity, looking for talent, and it is in fairly a good shortage here. And so this is all kind of part and parcel, right? Like, how do you protect your environment if you can't hire people? Well, how do we get more intelligent with technology and automation and other tools to decrease that need for people, because they're very short. They're in very short supply. And then this is a common thread too. And again, we Sean and others kind of touched on this throughout their presentations, but we're in a fairly interesting point in time today with respect to the kind of financial markets and so on and so forth. And so people are looking to continue to mature and grow while reducing spend. Sorry, just there we go. Yeah, but again, this for us is kind of key. One of the big reasons we gravitated towards the Microsoft security stack for as our cornerstone for all of our service offerings was because of the path that Microsoft was heading down, and so we're going to drill into this over the course of our discussion today. So just to kind of bolt onto that, I've been in IT for over 25 years. I've been in the cyberspace going back to 2011. Back in the day, it was one of these things, kind of antivirus, firewalls. That was pretty much it. This concept of developing really well-oiled security programs wasn't a huge thing. Ransomware was starting to kind of come out, but wasn't quite as proliferant as it is today. And this is the reality. Like, this isn't an option anymore for any shop. I mean, all shops are basically running some form of technology, and cybersecurity is no longer an option. Like, it's mandatory. Interesting article here. They go on to talk about the Biden administration and what they're doing more from a kind of a regulatory perspective to start to mandate that cybersecurity and controls are baked into not only government entities but also businesses. This is not an option any longer. And then you kind of take a step back for a sec. Again, I've got a background in IT. We look at, we were talking about this whole concept of shifting more and more to the cloud. Earlier today, we're talking about data, data governance. Data is proliferating. We've got hybrid workloads, just the number of systems. There's no IT environment that is static day to day. And then on top of that, you start to deploy security controls on top of that with a multitude of different technologies, incredibly complex and difficult to manage. And on top of that, we've got threat actors that are constantly at our door, knocking, trying to, inherently get that foot in the door, right? So how do we reconcile all of this? How do we manage this? And much like kind of the data governance side, this isn't a point in time thing. It's not like we deploy a bunch of tools or a tool and then we walk away and we're good. This is a journey, and the journey really never ends. And so again, this is where when we start to get into what Microsoft is up to, they're really starting to address some of these core issues. Just to kind of really kind of take it down a level, and when we take a look at a cybersecurity program, why do they fail? Gone are the days of, well, I've got a firewall, I've got antivirus, so I'm good. I heard you guys were chattering a little bit about the whole kind of pandemic and people kind of going back in the office, but we very much still live in this hybrid world where we don't have people working in an office behind desktops, behind a firewall. We've got people that are very mobile. And so how do we start to ensure that we've got good controls kind of right across the board? If we take a look at going back to a security program, kind of that concept of making sure that we're looking at defense in depth. Why do programs fail? The number one reason, and we are still faced with this today, and we still talk to customers that are in this situation where we've got kind of the lonely couple of security folks, and their leadership is saying, I want security, and then they say, okay, well, this is what we need to do, but the support isn't really there, right? So this is still an issue that we need to kind of keep working on. Senior level support needs to be there. Again, this isn't really a nice to have. This is a mandatory thing that needs to be addressed. So how do we get that support? How do we make sure the funding is there? How do we make sure that this is baked into what we're doing from a business perspective and a technology perspective? We still see quite a bit of this too, where a company, and it's actually becoming less and less of a thing, largely because of ransomware. But this whole concept of, well, let's go and focus on compliance. Let's go get a bunch of check boxes, and therefore let's just deploy the technology. Check, we're good. The problem with that model is they tend to fall over fairly quickly, spending a lot of time on standing up a bunch of technologies to get a checkbox. And operationally, the minute you kind of get into the very next day of operations, it all falls apart. So how do we start to flip the paradigm? I mean, compliance is important, regulations are important, but how do we focus on security first and get the inherent benefit of compliance? This is a big one. Just technology is all over the place. So I personally got experience of building and executing large-scale enterprise cybersecurity programs where you go and you install, 25 technologies. You hire a security team. The security team spends all their time basically supporting that stack, patching and maintaining and doing all that good stuff, and less about the actual output of what those tools are telling us to secure the environment. Again, getting a lot better now that a lot of these security technologies are available in the cloud, but still a long way to go here. And again, we'll talk how the Microsoft security stack is addressing that. And then when you start to kind of get down the list a little bit here, what we want is very high value integration and automation. Again, these threat actors are moving at incredible speeds. They're using machine learning. They're using artificial intelligence. It is now a full-blown economy. It's a full-blown business. With investment going and R&D dollars going into their programs. Well, how do we make sure that what we're building can actually detect and that we can respond very, very quickly to these threats? We talked about the staffing piece. This will be an ongoing struggle, trying to find people who actually understand kind of what to do when the data rolls in and how do we respond to these threats. And then lastly, this is kind of where we start to get to the gravy. How do we get to a point where we're actually using metrics to iteratively drive a value? You don't necessarily need to have controls right across the board that's pinning your business down to the wall. What we want is we want to have very pragmatic security programs that support the business. In order to do that, leveraging metrics really ties into that and helps move towards that model. Okay, great, right? So we know why these programs fail. Well, let's talk about why Microsoft. And again, I just want to highlight, going back to about the 2017, 2018 timeframe where we started to, I mean, we'd been a Microsoft partner for a bit, but we saw where they were going with their solutions. And this is why we jumped in, because they've got this broad view of security, talking about defense in depth. Microsoft checks a lot of these boxes, where a lot of the other providers today are a little bit more myopic in their solution offerings. And so we talk about highly comprehensive, highly integrated security controls, operational sustainability by leveraging cloud and automation, the possibility of consolidation, right? So, customers who are moving towards an E5 license, there's inherently a number of security features that are baked right into that. So, and in a lot of cases, we'll get pulled in, a customer's already spending money on other tooling, and they're paying for E5. And so we can not only look at enhancing their controls, but we can also look at saving them some money. We talked about DevOps earlier today. We talked about this whole kind of shift and modernizing applications. This whole concept of guardrails is huge. So how do we incrementally make sure that we've got that concept of security by design baked in, so that controls are inherently going in when a system's being implemented? We talked about compliance. Again, byproduct, right? How do we get all this wonderful stuff in? How do we make sure that we're protecting the environment and the information, and make sure that we can check that box at the end? And we did touch on this briefly. So not only is Microsoft dealing with security, there's a big kind of Venn diagram when you talk about security and privacy. Microsoft is doing a lot from a compliance and privacy perspective, and inherently a lot of these compliance and privacy pieces are tied into some of these security tools that we're going to talk about. And actually, the last little widget I'll kind of layer in here is there's always a big overlap between security and kind of core infrastructure, right? So companies that are leveraging things like Intune or other Azure services, endpoint manager, things like that. Massive opportunities for efficiencies here and hooks with a lot of the security tooling, so that the infrastructure folks that are doing a lot of the deployment and management are leveraging the same tooling that they're used to using kind of day to day. Now, back in the day, and I don't hear this quite as much, but when we first started going down this path, people would say, "Oh, Microsoft, they're the ones that released all the vulnerabilities into the wild." Fairly, maybe at one point that was an issue, but again, going back to that webinar that I saw through yesterday, I think the number is $24 billion over the next 5 years that Microsoft is investing in their security tooling. There is no other provider or manufacturer of security tools that are investing that kind of money. Not only that, but the vast majority of companies are still running Windows on the desktop. You're running Office from a collaboration perspective, and so if we can so Microsoft's got those data points, but also kind of baking the security right into that tooling. Again, far more operationally efficient. But then you take a step back and you look at Gartner Magic Quadrants, and you look across all of these different spaces that Microsoft has landed on, and it's quite remarkable. Again, there is no other technology provider that is on this number of quadrants, and this will only continue to expand. And if I stop here for 1 second, just drill into identity and access management, the things that they're doing with Entra. Again, you go back to Active Directory, which was kind of the de facto unified identity store. The amount of data points, and both from a usability perspective, but then also just from a threats perspective that Microsoft has that they can feed back into their products, pretty much unparalleled. Like there's nobody else in the world that's got that level of visibility. And on top of it all, again, just going back to this investment, so a number of things were announced yesterday, kind of hot off the press, not really getting into detail, but when you look at again, going back to the media and kind of what's happening specifically in the technology landscape and this whole big push for AI, one of the things that Microsoft did announce yesterday, and they actually did a very brief demo on, and so we're expecting more to come, but they're releasing a product called Microsoft Security Copilot. This is all based on their AI technology, so ChatGPT is in the back end here. And the demo was quite surreal, where through the Security Copilot interface, just walking through an incident playing out, right from detection through to triage and response was quite something else. So again, and the way they're doing this is very smart in that they're taking all of their security products. Not only are they integrating with one another, but also starting to kind of layer this Copilot piece on top to really refine and provide far more streamlined security operations. Very, very progressive, kind of ahead of the market here, and I'm personally very excited to see get my hands on the tool and see where this thing goes. It looks very promising. So from here, what we're going to do is actually pivot, and we're going to talk through a bit of a case study. If we go back to, I think so we engaged with these folks back in it would have been 2020, kind of summer of 2021. This is a North American-based manufacturer, and they had a notable ransomware event in early 2020. They responded, quickly. I mean, they were literally down for days in the loss. All of their plants were down. The losses were quite notable, kind of day to day. They responded fast. They worked with an incident response forensic company to get a number of tools kind of stood up quickly to try to mitigate the threat, understand what was going on. They then were able to come up for a breath of fresh air, and they went out to RFP. And we responded with a Microsoft-based solution. And so we got engaged to provide some general advisory, vCISO services to help them lay out that IT security roadmap, and then support the execution of the roadmap through some staff augmentation and kind of transition into managed services. So what I'm going to do is just do a very high-level walkthrough here of the roadmap. And so again, kind of going back into kind of mid 2021, we started with a number of kind of key critical work streams. The other thing that we had was about 2 to 3 weeks to put together a high-level plan before getting in front of their board. Obviously, a material event like that, the board wakes up and they're like, okay, what are we doing? So we didn't have a ton of time, but we were able to stand up this roadmap fairly quickly. Where we started was a bit of a review of their current control posture. So did a fairly, kind of, I would say kind of end-to-end assessment of current control posture. Total transparency, there wasn't a lot. And really what we're doing is trying to set up, well, kind of what is the starting point? Where are we at? What do we need to kind of throw out? Where are the massive gaps? Where are the biggest areas of risk? And so we started there. We then started to get into some tactical asset discovery and rationalization. So kind of grabbing tools, using a lot of spreadsheets and pivot tables and whatnot, just to kind of get our bearings. And what that then did is helped us start to kind of come up with a game plan to look at getting the endpoint coverage up, right? So going back to the Defender for Endpoint. Again, the other thing to note here is that these folks were on, I think, an E2E license at the time, and we're already looking at E5. And so this just pushed the business case kind of over the finish line. So they went and acquired the E5 license. And from there, we were able to start moving on getting the endpoint piece up. One of the interesting things was during their kind of recovery efforts, they thought that they had complete coverage on their endpoints with their EDR technology. And it turns out that as we started to deploy Defender for Endpoint, because again, Defender for Endpoint not only protects the endpoints, but it also gives us really great visibility onto coverage across the environment, tells us which tools are running on system, we could start to see big gaps in coverage with the tactical EDR solution they had deployed. So we were kind of iterating here, right? Deploying, watching, and then making sure that we had a good coverage right across the board. In tandem with that, we stood up Microsoft Sentinel and turned on our SOC services, right? So started watching the environment 24/7, 365. The other key piece to this is security operations. They had a legacy email security gateway that was not properly configured. And so we were able to rip that out, get Defender for Office 365 stood up, and drastically reduce the amount of like even just spam and noise, but then really start to cut out the malicious email activity that was dripping into their environment. We got the phishing button enabled, started getting people that ran some campaigns, got people reporting suspicious emails, which I'll come back to our SOC. Our SOC materially handles those specific email reviews and able to kind of go and pull malicious emails, figure out if anybody clicked links, that type of thing. We also helped them on the network side. This was a bit less Microsoft, but flat network, so on and so forth. So we kind of helped them get a bit of a design going and started to work with them to get their network security posture in better state here. Kind of in parallel here, we started to get into some identity access management work. And so when you look at this whole concept of zero trust, identity access management is such a key component. And so we worked on a number of very key critical kind of initial quick wins. And it took a little bit of time. It was quick-ish, we'll call it, but successfully got Windows Hello deployed, which was huge for them because that Windows Hello, next to impossible to phish, but you've got that second factor that's biometric based. So again, really kind of focused on some big wins to very quickly kind of reduce risk there, and then help them out with some privileged access management work, which part of that was some of the native features within Azure AD. On the information protection side, where we started was just, again, so one of the things that the threat actors did when they got in their environments is they tore down their backups, right? So helping them make sure that their backups were properly configured, secured, but then also looking at replicating those backups up to the cloud so that there was a second copy with alternative controls. That was another key component, which it doesn't show it here, but we're virtually through that bit of work. And then I'm going to kind of just run back up top again to talk about some of the other things that we're kind of into now, be very close to finishing up. So helping them with their vendor risk management program. So starting to look at vendors, and that whole third-party risk is a big area of concern, where there's lots of cases where a third party gets compromised, they have access into somebody's network, and that's how the threat actors penetrate. Helping them work through iteratively help them just refine, or in some cases establish net new policy standards, and getting that all stood up. Cherry on the top for us is once you get through this program, they are going for SOC 2 compliance. And again, it's very interesting going back to the business folks actually really taking note and seeing the value in what we're doing here. So not looking at this as a cost per se, but being able to go to their customers with a SOC 2 certification to say, hey, folks, we take this seriously. And by the way, here's a third-party certification to validate that we take this seriously. Again, kind of laying down based on the asset management work that we did here, we're able to leverage a lot of the Microsoft tooling to refine their asset management process based on the data that we're pulling from Defender, Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Cloud Apps, all of those Defender products. Helping them, again, the way the Microsoft stack works, we deploy Defender for Endpoint as an example, and now we can actually start seeing vulnerabilities, and we can start building out a vulnerability management program without having to deploy any additional technology, right? So we're kind of putting some finishing touches on their vulnerability management program. One of the big areas that we're into now, again, these folks are in manufacturing, so they've got plants. The plants, in a lot of cases, are running very legacy technologies. So how do we get some visibility there? We're well versed in Defender for IoT. and specifically the operational technology sensor that is passive, has passive detection capabilities, passive asset mapping capabilities, so that we can start to actually understand what's running in the plants, what vulnerabilities are sitting in the plants, tie that back into security operations and the monitoring, so that if there's a threat that triggers within the plant, we actually have visibility. I'm just going to skip past some of this stuff. On the identity access management side, again, looking to leverage some of the native kind of Entra Azure AD features to help them with ongoing identity access management governance, so on and so forth. And we talked about data governance. I think somebody mentioned Purview. Again, this is far more tactical. This isn't governance per se, but this is more, how do we leverage Purview to start to get into things like data labeling or information labeling, and kind of tied back to their information classification and information security policy. How do we start baking controls directly in once somebody tags, as an example, a Word document as a kind of high sensitive or classified document? How do we make sure that controls automatically get deployed there? And then lastly, this is, we're just kind of stepping into this now, but secure coding practices. So again, going back to DevOps and all those kind of wonderful new concepts, they've got a bit of a traditional development shop. So now we're trying to move them towards a little bit more current practices here. So they are looking at DevOps. So how do we make sure that we start to embed those secure coding practices into, build those guardrails? How do we make sure that as people are coding, that things are going in and releasing, that things are going in securely? And again, not to get into the weeds here, but you can see we all along the way, we were leveraging, and in some cases fully leveraging, in some cases partially leveraging Microsoft technologies to support all of these different areas. And so one of our offerings, we do have what we call our end-to-end roadmap. Again, we are a Microsoft security shop. And so we've got our framework. That framework is designed to be very fluid, right? Every company is different. And, you've got different things like, different regulations, compliance requirements, different states of maturity from a security perspective, different areas of risk, different tools with different renewal dates. And so what we do as part of this is we run through a bit of a discovery exercise to get our bearings and understand all of those things. Based on that, what we do is we get into that roadmap development, right? So let's start to kind of lay this out. And this tends to be a bit iterative, right? So we'll develop it, we'll regroup with the key stakeholders, review it, and then kind of beat it up and get to a point where everybody's happy. And then from there, if the customer elects to, they can pull us in and we can help, right? So we've got a suite of advisory services, managed services that can help, in some cases accelerate, in some cases actually just implement because they don't have the people. And then post that, in a lot of cases, what will end up happening is maybe not the full suite, but we will take on certain managed pieces. Because security is a 24/7 thing, and building your own security operations center with 24/7 folks around the clock is not a cheap endeavor. And so this approach is what we use to that case study that we just saw. That this is how we went about it. And again, we've made tremendous amounts of progress to the point where, like, even from a cyber insurance perspective, they've been able to, because of the speed we were able to move at, they were able to actually renew now for the second year straight. Even after a material incident and a claim. So now we're going to pivot a bit, and we're going to kind of drill in a little bit further here. I'm just going to kind of touch on this briefly. We talked about this whole concept of application modernization, shifting more and more to the cloud, serverless infrastructure, serverless services, and although not the most perfect example, but this is a very, kind of prolific, fairly wide known incident that happened not too long ago. Actually, LastPass was breached multiple times, and they think different threat actors, but it was a bit of a culmination type exercise. And so in this case, what happened was a DevOps engineer, their home computer got targeted. there was a vulnerable third-party software package sitting on that computer. They used that to get their hooks in, started remotely executing code, planted a keylogger, right? So the company was employing MFA, which is great. But one thing that I didn't touch on is the fact that guess what the threat actors are now all going after? They're all going after MFA because most people are starting to turn that on now. So just kind of speaking back to the fact that these threat actors, it's not static. They're constantly looking at taking a look at what organizations are doing, what the trends are, and well, how do we go and exploit that now? So in this case, they were able to capture the second factor and gain access. And they got access to the LastPass corporate vault. And basically the punchline here is they were able to actually get all the encryption details, get copies of backups, and start to decrypt those backups, which ultimately kind of resulted in that information being stolen. So not a great story. But here we're talking about people working from home. We're talking about bypassing kind of what are now becoming some key common controls. But then we're talking about data exfiltration outside of a cloud storage bucket, with encryption keys being decrypted and leveraged here. And so, well, how do we defend against this? I mean, again, going back to defense in depth, there's a number of things that we would recommend to address this. Again, defense in depth is key, but if we just kind of zone in, again, Microsoft's got a number of different security products. One of their products is Defender for Cloud. Defender for Cloud is an evolving product. They're constantly adding new features to it. But the whole concept here is, and there's again no other company that's really doing this right now. Not only are they looking to protect Azure, right? So obviously they have great insights as to what goes into Azure, and there's some additional benefits that hook right into Azure services. And even companies that are running other cloud solutions or running a multi-cloud type, taking a multi-cloud type approach, Microsoft is inherently investing money in figuring out, well, how do we protect AWS workloads, Google Cloud workloads, and other cloud solutions on the roadmap. When we look at Defender for Cloud, here we're looking at a few things. So one would be something like the security posture. So how are we doing from a hardening perspective? We can get some very good insights there. We can also start to gather security alerts based on Microsoft's library. We can augment those security alerts. We've got some experience, as an example, developing, pulling in log data from various AWS services, and building custom analytic rules to try to detect potential issues there. But then even things like DevOps, right? So we talked about DevOps before. They've got a DevOps security widget or module within Defender for Cloud now. And here's an example of a specific kind of alert type where it went through the configured code repository and picked up the fact that there was some hard-coded access keys in the code, and they're flagging that. Right, so very comprehensive. The Defender for Cloud breaks into a number of different components, like even things like Defender for SQL, Defender for containers, right? So really kind of trying to support this whole shift and modernize, big kick to modernize and shift things to the cloud. Defender for Cloud is inherently designed to help augment the security of those specific workloads. What we're going to do is break it down one more level here. And so going back to that cloud compromise at LastPass that we were speaking of, well, how do we defend against that specific situation with cloud data exfil? And so, I don't think I've listed this here, but preemptively, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you've got good configuration, you've got monitoring on that configuration, right? That's number one. In a lot of cases, data gets leaked because of an improperly configured, S3 bucket or an Azure blob that's open to the public. That's easy pickings for a threat actor. right? So we want to kind of preemptively make sure that configuration is tight. But then what we want to do is layer on top of that is strong detective controls. As an example, those that come from Defender for Cloud. We want to make sure that we've got centralized logging and integrated alerting. So if you go back to that LastPass example where it all started on that individual's workstation, well, how do we make sure that we've got visibility from the workstation all the way up to and including the cloud infrastructure that they're using to do their job? And to extend that out, like how do we make sure that, as an example, we've got visibility to email that's coming into the environment that could trigger the whole thing, right? Email comes in, this is very common. Email comes in, they click the bad link, that basically kind of starts the whole thing. How do we make sure that we've got that visibility right throughout the environment? And then again, because all of this stuff is moving fast, the minute they get into that bucket, they can start exfilling data like virtually immediately. So how do we make sure that whatever we're doing here, that we not only can detect it quickly, but we can, equally fast in a fast fashion, respond to that specific detection. What you see here is, so we think we're very process oriented. We think basically everything is a process within our security operations center. And so here you see a bit of a sample example of a cloud storage compromise kind of workflow where we've got an Azure or a storage container that gets popped. We got Defender for Cloud picking that up. And then here you see kind of the workflow. It comes into the SOC. Our SOC is looking at that threat. We're enriching information. We're starting to make decisions on, well, is this a false positive, yes or no? Because that happens a lot in the security world. If it isn't a false positive, well, how do we go ahead and contain that threat? And then once the threat is contained, well, how do we move towards remediation? And then, part of our standard operating procedures is also always to kind of take a look and say, okay, well, was this an isolated case? And again, like Sentinel and the Defender tooling helps us do this, where we can take a look to see if is this a bigger than a breadbasket? Is this limited to this specific asset? In this case, a cloud storage asset, or is this bigger than this? Are there compromised hosts? Are there compromised user identities? So on and so forth. So without further ado, we're sitting about 40 minutes now. I'm going to actually turn this over to Nolan from our team, and Nolan's actually going to hopefully pray to the demo gods here. We're going to show you a demo on this workflow. Nolan.
Yep. All right. So hopefully everybody can see that. As Andrew set the stage here, we're going to walk through kind of that cloud storage compromise. So threat actor gets in, they're accessing things that maybe they shouldn't. Defender for Cloud creates an alert for us, and now we're in Microsoft Sentinel. Seeing this alert, I'm going to start kind of the investigation and walk through what that looks like. So we pop this open here.
Hey Nolan, just before you go there, can you just go back for a sec? Just maybe explain the alert. So like in this case, we saw what it picked up was a data exfiltration to a Tor node, right? Which is a commonly used tactic that threat actors will use to kind of masquerade and move data around.
Yeah. Yeah, so in this instance, we pop this open. Right, so we got access from a Tor node to a storage blob. Defender for Cloud does its thing, lets us know what's going on. So we can see somebody from the Tor network accessed our storage container, super secret storage. Within the storage account, they used a shared access signature that they compromised to basically download some content from that storage container. That's where this alert brings us. We know a little bit about kind of what we've read there. We got a bit of information as to kind of what entities were compromised, where that attack came from. But that's pretty much it at this point. So what we're going to do here is we're going to run our basically our triage playbook. This is going to run in the background for us, and within a minute or two, it's going to start updating the work notes within this ticket, doing all of those actions that Andrew had just described on that last slide there. So Give this a quick second. All right, we can see the triage has started. So just by running that kind of triage, what's happening now is the base triage module starts up, gets us some information, basically where that compromise came from. So here's the IP address, here's the country and kind of area where it came from. Going up a little bit higher now, the next thing the triage engine does, it's going to reach out to VirusTotal, get any information we have about this IP address. So we can see here, again, where the attacker came from. VirusTotal, 6 of their detection engines have marked it as malicious, 1 has flagged as suspicious, some are undecided, some are neutral. No community information about this particular IP, but definitely something that needs to be investigated further, knowing that some of these were flagged. So if we kind of progress upwards a little bit more, next thing the automation is going to do, we're going to get some insights from Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So we're going to say, hey, this access, was this done on one of our corporate endpoints? Is this a device that we know about that accessed it? So looking back 30 days within the organization, no known device from this corporation has come from this particular IP. So again, very, very suspicious, very odd. Going up a little bit more, we're going to try and get any other threat intelligence indicators that we can. So again, we reach out to VirusTotal. Now we're going to reach out to Microsoft Threat Intel, any other third-party threat intel sources that we've integrated with Microsoft Sentinel to see if we can find anything else about that IP address, good, bad, or indifferent, that may kind of indicate what it is, if it's known to us, things like that. Progressing up a little bit more. Next thing we have here is our priority calculator. So based on all of this information that we've gathered in this automated triage, we've assigned some scores to this incident, right? So the incident severity itself, whoops, it's jumping around because it's still updating. Incident severity based on Microsoft came in as a medium. We do see that there were some other related alerts tied to this event. So we've given it a score of 15. We've basically tagged this, a priority of 15. We've tagged this alert with a priority of 15. So that means for our analysts that are going to do an investigation, not only do we have the severity of the event, but we also have given it an automated priority. So if there's multiple things going on, the analysts know basically which priority to start working on things in triage based on the information that we know so far. So I'm going to go up a little bit more. Next thing we get here is triaging the storage itself. So great, this alert came in, but what are we actually looking at? So we can see the resource group where this particular storage blob was, any network access control lists that they may have applied to their storage. In this case, we see it's wide open, it's set to allow, they're not restricting anything, as well as any other kind of key details here, right? Are they following best practices? Is it encrypted? Are there shared access keys enabled? Is it a publicly accessed blob? All the way down to the encryption settings for both the file and the blob itself. Right, again, give our analysts some information as to what's going on, but also just let us know, maybe let us know basically the configuration of this. If it's something that should be concerned, is it something that looks like maybe it was half locked down but never finished, things like that. We're going to proceed up a little bit more. Next thing we see here on the storage, we see that there were shared access signatures assigned basically to the storage in this file. Here are the 2 keys basically that grant permission to that file. Because it was accessed by a shared access key, we can safely assume it was one of these 2 keys that performed that action. From there, we're going to go up another step. Right now, we're going to say, are there any other kind of storage related events or anything else that is similar to this incident that's happened in this organization within the last little while? So now we can see there was actually 2 other security events for the same thing, also picked up by Defender for Cloud. So we can see that this is not kind of a single instance. This has happened before. Again, the analyst can review that and make whatever decisions they want based on kind of that information. Now we're going to run some automated analysis based on kind of the last year of data. What is the number of anomalous kind of transactions that have happened recently versus kind of over that year trend? And then what we get up to next is actually the remediation. So we talked about those storage keys that one of them was used to grant access. This playbook has actually gone ahead. It's regenerated the key 1 and it's regenerated key 2. So whatever keys were compromised in this attack, they've now been regenerated. They can't be used to access it anymore, exfiltrate any additional data. Those keys are essentially dead in the water at this point. And then kind of to wrap it all up, we also get a recommendation at the end. So great, we've seen what happened. It was definitely suspicious. We've remediated it in the short term. Now here's some recommendations on what can be done to that storage to prevent this from happening again. So again, Microsoft's recommendations are storage accounts should be restricted. They should be using customer managed keys if required. You should be accessing them over a private link connection, not the public internet. And you definitely should have some network ACLs in place to basically restrict who can access these and where they can be accessed from. And again, all of this triage ran kind of as we were talking through it. So these kind of responses can actually happen in near real time when these detections are picked up.
Yeah, and just last little bit of context here. So what I mean, some of you may be familiar with Microsoft Sentinel, right? So this is Microsoft Sentinel that this is running on. This is what our SOC operates in. And all of the playbook, the triage work and the response actions, those are custom developed by Defenda, right? So we go back to we think very process like. So we take our playbooks. We kind of document those workflows based on kind of alerts and incidents, and then this is kind of the secret sauce that we're layering on top to enable our SOC folks to be able to very efficiently triage, pull all information together. We're reaching out to various Microsoft products to pull the data points in. We're reaching out to third-party service to enrich. And then based on the assessment, we can take further actions, such as in this case, we basically regenerated keys to revoke access. Thanks, Nolan. So just to kind of round out our part of the session here today, I'm just going to go back to our slideware here. And so again, when you look at what we do, we made a very conscious decision to move towards the Microsoft security stack. And so everything that you're looking at here, except for the offensive security services piece, this is all on top of Microsoft security stack. And we've kind of teased it apart into these 3 big pillars: prepare, manage, validate. So, the first piece is that advisory side. That could be you're starting with an end-to-end roadmap as an example, or if, an organization already has a bit of a roadmap and is looking to move towards the Microsoft security stack, we've got our professional services here that can step in and implement any of the products tied to the Microsoft security stack. And then, once we get things set up, in some cases, customers are like, we're good, we got it from here, we've got our own team, perfect. But in a lot of cases, customers will say, hey, listen, like we really do need some form of a managed service to take care of certain bits and pieces. And we can do anything from a full, what we call MXDR. So this would be dealing with endpoint threats, Defender for Cloud alerts, email, suspicious emails, identity related alerts. And managing the SIM piece, Microsoft Sentinel, or if a customer said, hey, listen, we're interested in getting started. We just want to start with the SIM piece. We want to start with Microsoft Sentinel. And we do have our managed SIM offering, which would just be standing up Sentinel and helping the customer manage that with a kind of 24/7 initial triage. but without having a lot of the Microsoft tooling deployed, we only have limited visibility, right? So we've got a different combination of permutation of managed solutions here. And one of the big ones I'm going to call out is we do have what we call a remote incident response service. So by default, anybody who has our MXDR for IT service, we pop in a remote incident response retainer. And this is designed for kind of that like level 3, oh my God, the bad guy got in. Now what do we do? We can deliver remote incident response services here to do that detailed forensic investigation, reporting, all that good stuff, work with legal firms, so on and so forth, to help the customer kind of dig out of that type of scenario. And then I touched on this briefly, but we do have offensive security services as well to help kind of validate, right? So pen testing, red teaming, that type of stuff. And then just last piece, I mean, again, I kind of already talked to this, but at the end of the day, like, we have different ways in. We're very flexible. We've got our models and our kind of overarching framework is designed to be able to start at various points, irrespective of where the customer is at, and very iteratively turn things on and mature things kind of over time. That's all I had. I know I'm sure I cut you guys after lunch. You're probably all hitting a wall, and we covered a lot of ground here. But just if there's any questions, happy to have a bit of a discussion here.
Andrew, thanks so much for the presentation. Any questions either in the room or anything that you might see online there?
Nothing online.
Just as you're processing that and thinking about that a little bit, Andrew, thanks again. It really stands out to, hopefully you see, we certainly see why Enviro and Defenda are such good partners, right? I mentioned Sentinel at the top of the call, saying we find ourselves, because as Azure infrastructure experts, we bump into that conversation all the time. And to be able to say to a client, sure, well, architecture framework, we can plug it in, make it work. Yeah, sure, that all sounds fine. But then you start to think about, but who's going to manage these logs? Who's going to get the best? Like, you see everything that Andrew presented here. That's that whole next level, where that baton pass or that demark or that handshake between Enviro and Defenda happens, right? So hopefully you see why the partnership between our two organizations was just like, oh, you do that, and it meets in the middle, and it's perfect, right? There's like literally no crossover where we're out in the market competing for that same piece of business. It's extremely complementary. Greg, I feel like you want to say something to wrap the day, but maybe I'll just offer a couple of things, and I'll pass over to you to close it off. Thank you all so much. I know it's been a fair investment of your time today. We really appreciate whether you came to us in person or you joined virtually. We're really grateful for the time you spent, and I do hope, as I said at the top of the conversation, hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you made a personal connection with somebody, that kind of thing. But you walked away with some value. Feedback is a gift. I would really welcome any feedback that you wanted to share with me, whether that's casually over a drink later, or send me a note or something. This quite frankly is the first one of these we've done, and we're gonna go do more. But there's always tweaks and adjustments that you can make to make it better, right? So I'd really love to hear what you thought was great. Sean, make sure more of that happens, and this stuff, maybe you could tweak this, maybe you could adjust this. In terms of, I guess, a couple other kind of pieces here. I saw somebody taking notes, that kind of thing. That's awesome. We will provide every slide, every bit of content. And just something else to think about is so many of these opportunities to dip a toe into something, a POC of something. I'll say in 95% of the time, Microsoft will fund it, or they'll fund a significant amount of it, right? To help you, help us do a project with you at extremely little cost. Now, they have their ratios in terms of how that has to work. So I don't want to make a blanket statement that 100% of the time it's just that straightforward, but a high majority of the time it's very straightforward. And between Enviro and Defenda, we have all the appropriate certifications and credentials that allow us to access all those funding portals, because not every organization can do that. So just food for thought, that if you're like, I want to dip a toe in this, I want to POC this, I want to see if I can make it work in my environment, it's pretty straightforward for us to plug in at a very low cost for you to experiment and learn and try that. With that, Craig, maybe we'll turn it over to you to close it off.
Sure. Thanks, John.
I'll echo what Sean said. Thank you all for giving up, half of your day or a bit more. Your time is valuable. I do know, it's hard to get away from the office, but it's been great meeting in person, seeing, shaking hands, seeing everybody who's come out and talked one-on-one. Again, as Sean said, hopefully you took something away from this. There were some common themes there. And I think the one is that this is a journey. We're all on the cloud journey, and it's not like okay, we're migrated to the cloud, we're now done. We can kind of just say we're in the cloud, but no, it's a journey. There's everything to consider from, well, how do you optimize? How do you maximize the value that you're getting out of that? Is it just staying in ISVMs, as Davey talked about? Like that's one step, right? But then maybe modernizing and leveraging PaaS as a next step to get more with less. And that's the theme. You saw it on all the slides. All three of the presentations talked about that. That's Microsoft's theme for this fiscal year, is do more with less. So hopefully that resonated. There was also echoing in each of the presentations around skilling challenges. And I think you're all probably facing this. It's hard to hire skill sets. Moving to the cloud brings new challenges. Your teams have to now learn things or get uncomfortable because they're used to doing things in an old on-prem way, and now they have to learn new methods. And that's where a partner like ourselves or Defenda can help you bridge that gap and work alongside you while your team is getting up to speed. It's not that you have to hand over the keys to us, we do something, then hand it back to you, and then you're now stuck trying to figure it out on your own. It's a partnership, and that's how we view it. So hopefully those themes kind of resonated and kind of stuck out for you guys. Also like to thank Andrew and the rest of the Defenda team that have helped to put this together. It's definitely a big effort. As you've sat on the call most of the day probably today and listened to us all, but thank you for putting this together. It was extremely valuable for me also to hear what your presentation is that you give to prospective customers, because it gives me a new appreciation for what this partnership truly means for Envero and for Defenda.